First, let us see what is happening today, because the UK Prime Minister Theresa May, she is making her pitch to EU leaders right now, asking for an extension to Britain's Brexit deadline. It is a crucial summit that will shape Britain's future relationship with the EU. Now, she only wants a short delay until June the 30th, and we do have Jean-Claude Juncker, who was welcoming leaders into Brussels today. But you know what? EU leaders are likely to tell her to accept a much longer delay with tough conditions attached. Now, here is the German leader Angela Merkel with a warning to the UK.
Wir werden darüber beratschlagen, welche Art von Verlängerung wir Großbritannien einräumen wollen. Es kann gut sein, dass es eine längere Verlängerung als die von der britischen Premierministerin erbetene ist.
Okay, let's start with you, Nigel. When we're talking about potentially strict conditions, because you were saying, well, there's a potential that there is an even more Eurosceptic government that could come later in the UK. But look, for now, what we have is a possible one-year extension with stricter conditions. How do you like that?
Do you know, the idea of extension, of course, is appalling, because we're 3 years on from a referendum. We backed it up in a general election. We were promised that the will of the people would be carried out. So on the face of it, I'm horrified by it, but I have to say this. As a Eurosceptic, as a leaver, very committed leaver, I'd much rather now have an extension than accept the treaty that Mr Barnier gave to Mrs May, because that would have left us out only in name.
A long extension, a long one.
Well, it can't be a short one.
Okay.
Because we've got European Parliament elections, we've got summer holidays, we've then got a new European Commission coming in. So realistically, there wouldn't be a new negotiation of any kind until at least November.
Okay, before I get to Anna Maria and Roberto's thoughts on this, let's go to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is at the summit himself. So, Darren, what are we hearing of what Theresa May actually came here to offer the EU? I mean, there were talks that she shouldn't have come here empty-handed. So what is it?
Yeah, indeed. Well, of course, she's come here, Tessa, asking for that extension to the end of June in the hope that Britain somehow, even if it takes part in the EU elections, will somehow not have to actually have MEPs sit in the European Parliament. Of course, it doesn't convene until the start of July. The problem for Theresa May, as pointed out by Donald Tusk last night in his letter ahead of this Council summit, is that it is still incredibly unlikely that Theresa May, given where the talks are at Westminster, will be able to get a deal through before June 30th. And so in those circumstances, the EU Council tonight will be talking about a much longer extension. Now, there are two further dates to consider. One is until the end of this year, to December 2019. Now, we think there is widespread favour for that date, not least of all because it means that we will not necessarily have these emergency summits every couple of months. The EU business will not be entirely taken up with the bandwidth of Brexit. There is a third date being put forward, and that is until March of next year, well into 2020, nearly 4 years since the EU referendum. Though it does sound that that date has its critics, most notably in France, who simply do not want this Brexit process to be prolonged for almost a year's time, taking up kind of EU business and the disruption that could come with that.
All right. Well, it sounds like the EU might be asking for some pretty strict conditions in a Brexit delay. We were talking about that earlier. But, you know, the European Parliament today actually warned Theresa May not to arrive at the summit empty-handed. Now, if she wanted an extension, and this is a statement that they put out, they said, we expect the Prime Minister to indicate what are the prospects of the cross-party talks between the government and the Labour Party, and also the anticipated results and whether a solid parliamentary majority in support of such an agreement exists. If not, she should indicate clearly the way forward, be it a referendum, a general election, or a revocation. So, yeah, these are the strict conditions, Darren. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, indeed. Of course, the concern, particularly most vocally espoused by the French, is that somehow Britain becomes a disruptive member over this extension to the Article 50 process, that it becomes a kind of the bad cop in this process, trying to disrupt EU business over the next, 6 months or so, if there is a prolonged extension. Now, the reason this fear has come about, not least of all because Jacob Rees-Mogg, a hardcore Brexiteer, suggested that should be the UK's course of action. And there is concern here in Brussels that ultimately Theresa May is not going to be the Prime Minister potentially for much longer. In those circumstances, they may well be dealing with a known entity, someone who is much harsher and thinks a lot less of the European Union. And that is why the French and indeed others are insisting that conditions will have to come with a long extension. What could they be? Well, they cover everything from essentially Britain not being able to take part in the selection of the EU Commission President, not having a veto on future budget decisions, or indeed that the EU 27 could meet amongst themselves informally, talk about the future business of the EU, but of course they would all have to include the UK in the final decision when it comes to a vote. All in all, it's very difficult stuff, Tessa. Be in no doubt that this is going to be a late night, potentially a council summit that goes into the wee small hours of tomorrow morning.
All right, thanks for that, Darren McCaffrey there. I'd like to go to you, Anna Maria. When we're talking about those conditions being attached, this isn't going to go down well in the UK, is it? Or is this, because some would see it probably as a humiliation. If there's suggestions you take out the veto rights, if you take out any decision-making rights, wouldn't that not go down well?
I don't see this as conditions. I see that still we are focused to avoid the worst-case scenario, and it is that the UK would live without a withdrawal agreement, and no deal would be detrimental for all, mainly for the UK, but also for the rest of Europe. So I think that the European Union has really been calm, cool, and connected, focused with a lot of patience to try to avoid to disrupt people's life, to try to avoid to disrupt companies' life. And this constant, continued uncertainty, postponement, new summit, is, of course, detrimental for people. And that's our focus, especially in the European Parliament. So we have to give an extension. That is really my firm view. But an extension that gives the possibility to build a broad-based majority in the UK so that whoever Prime Minister goes to Commons, it will be voted. And it has to be broad-based because that's the long-term interest of the people of the UK and of Europe. So it has to be opposition and government parties together.
Nigel's shaking his head there, but I'll go to you first, Roberto.
He always does.
Is this? Do we see a way forward now with what is happening with an extension and potentially these conditions that we're seeing in Brexit?
Extension is very likely. Nigel Farage is trying to scare us about that, but we are not scared. And I think that indeed we have to reconcile two principles. Of course, if you are a member of the European Union, you have all the rights of member. So
exactly.
and so we cannot change a treaty for that. Another thing is that if you are asking, you cannot limit legally things because that would be illegal. On the other hand, of course, unless the UK revokes or decide to have a referendum, but things we are still wanting to live with just an extension. Politically, they have, and also legally, they have an obligation to loyal cooperation. So, of course, they will not engage in the discussion of 7-year budget of a union where they say they will not be part of that. So this is something which is blurred a bit, legally speaking, but I think is right that the number of conditions are framed, including the fact that in any case, the withdrawal agreement will not be reopened. So what is agreed? The withdrawal agreement will not be reopened. We can upgrade the political declaration. And of course, a lot of us would welcome also a rethinking of Brexit via elections or a referendum.
I'm not trying to scare you, but here is a fact, all right? If we fight European elections, the Eurosceptic parties will win.
No, I'm not so sure.
That is beyond doubt.
That is your wish.
I don't think so.
One at a time. One at a time.
Every single European election, every single European election since 1999, the Eurosceptics have exceeded expectations because under proportional representation, people will vote for them.
We will see that.
Mrs May, 71% of Conservative voters now support a WTO no-deal exit. That is where the Conservative Party voters are in the United States. So what it means is the next Prime Minister will be a Brexiteer. If you want another year or more of aggravation, you can have it.
So you are confirming that British MEPs, if you stay here, you are going to be a disruptive force.
Well, I've been quite disruptive.
Yes, already. Continue to be. Okay, Anna Maria, you wanted to.
That's really no news. That's really no news.
Exactly.
What is news is that we have seen hundreds of thousands of people in the UK, in the streets, saying to politicians, give results, deliver. We don't want chaos anymore. We want answers. We want concrete results. to the people.
Hence,
people are sick and tired of politics like the one.
They want to leave.
This is precisely
They
why.
want to leave.
No, they want to get on with their lives.
71% of Conservatives want to leave with no deal. You can't deny those facts.
If the agreement that's signed later on at the summit, if the draft that we have been seeing circulating, which will include a good faith behavior from the UK, which means
people go mad about
you
that.
cannot be disruptive.
You are not the people.
That will mean
you are not the people.
You're missing something here. There's been a massive shift in British public opinion.
Much more people want to remain.
In every single region of England and Wales, apart from London, there is now a big majority to leave with no deal. And that means the next Prime Minister is going to be a Eurosceptic. Wouldn't it be better to say to the United Kingdom, let's end this now?
Very quickly, jump in, Robert, and we'll move on.
This is irresponsible.
As I said a lot of time, I cannot compete with Farage propaganda. But the truth is that if you go to European election, it means that all the promises of Brexiters were fake. And at the end, when the country was confronted with the actual consequences of leaving European, they are thinking, wait a minute. So I don't think this is a great campaign for the Eurosceptics. On the contrary. So I imagine totally different results, by the way. So, of course, he's doing his job to campaign because he's already candidate. He's very keen, actually, of coming back to European Parliament. But we have not been distracted by him, and we will not be disrupted by him. So we will pretty well manage.
Exactly, I agree. I mean, this is a never-ending campaign that never stopped, and we've seen the results of your campaign. People are sick and tired of your lies. People are sick and tired of your cheating.
They want to leave.
They want you to leave.
They don't want to be talked down to by foreign politicians either, I can tell you that.
They want to be talked down by politicians that haven't delivered anything than chaos, implosions, and disruption in their lives.
No, the economy is going very well. We're doing well. Jobs are at a record high.
Because you are still a member of the European Union.
Very well.
People are losing their jobs. The economy is going down the drain.
We're doing brilliantly. Double the growth rate of the Eurozone. We're doing fine.
Okay, so basically you're confirming...
Maybe one should tell me that you are still a member of a single market. You knew that?
Yeah, we were told that we were told 500,000 jobs would go as soon as we voted to leave. In fact, employment's at a record high.
It's too good.
And the Eurozone's in big trouble.
Hegel, you are in the single market.
Okay.
The problem is people get scared to leave it because they know what would mean.
All right. The euro we have has been shaped, and I'm happy about that, by our dear friends from the UK. So don't shoot on your own soup.
Okay, let's leave it at that for now, because we'll move on. We'll get back to a lot of this. When the sun goes down now tonight over Brussels, actually, because the EU leaders are going to gather around that summit table. And Theresa May will have to make her case for a short extension. That's what she came here for. And it's expected to be the toughest audience member. We have France's Emmanuel Macron. Monsieur Macron, Europe's foremost leader, waiting to make his move. Mrs. May traveled to the City of Love yesterday to win the heart of her French counterpart. But could this Paris kiss be a poisoned one? More than 50 years ago, the British Prime Minister and French President met here. Britain wanted into Europe. Non was Charles de Gaulle's response. Now, with Brexit rendering Britain powerless, the UK wants leave to stay. And Emmanuel Macron is flexing his muscles. Will he seize on his very own de Gaulle moment, or will he lay down conditions to London? Close neighbors, yes, but old enemies too. The self-styled Emperor of Europe has Britain's future in his hands. I mean, you did bring up, Roberta, the legal constraints of potentially limiting what the British MEPs could do to avoid, any disruption in the EU. But there are suggestions of that code of conduct that I mentioned earlier, and also a gentleman's agreement that the British MEPs who do stay, end up in Parliament, would not, be involved in maybe big decision-making processes, or just keep the peace, so to speak.
No. One moment. There is a big difference between the Council, who represents the government, the states, and the European Parliament, who represent the citizens. Okay. So in the European Parliament sits representative all the citizens. So they represent all the citizens, European citizens. So they're not like member states. Okay. So we should be very careful in imagining limitation of the freedom of the members. Another thing that at the political level, we of course will take into account the fact that the UK members are members of a country which is still supposed to leave. And so in what is not legal But what is political organization, we might take
But
this
do you
into
agree
account.
in the concept of what Macron is calling for, basically, in the principle of what he is calling for?
Well, when you're a member, you're a full member with all rights. And I don't think there are very new conditions. What we're saying is no withdrawal agreement. That's, we said it before. We say integrity of the internal market and of the four freedoms. And custom union. We are saying we are even ready now to reopen and upgrade the political declaration, but no negotiation on the future as long as you're not a third country. There is nothing new here.
Okay, so
everything else is
you're not going to have your
There
hands
is
tied
nothing
anyway.
new here.
It's
Nothing's
not
changing.
legal.
The withdrawal treaty is never going to get passed by this Parliament. The idea...
Which Parliament?
The idea, this current Parliament, is never going to agree to it. As I say, the British people are getting more Eurosceptic by the month. It'd be far better for us just to leave from everyone's perspective.
I understand.
Yes.
Farage is nervous that Brexit might not take place.
We are running out of time.
But it's a possibility.
We have run out of time, unfortunately. We'd love to listen to this all day long, but we have run out of time.